Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an impactful and breathtaking story. Let's meet Cassian Merrick, an architect who was dead for 7 minutes and came back with a completely transformative vision of Jesus. What he saw on the other side challenges everything we imagine about faith and spirituality and reveals a powerful truth that religions hide. Are you ready to dive into this exciting journey? So leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any content like this. Now, get ready for this unique and surprising experience. The sky in Denver that morning on December 14, 2023, was a clear blue, with the sun casting sparkling reflections on the snow piled on the sidewalks. The cold was biting, but my mind was more focused on the time. The clock on the car dashboard said 8:17, and I was late. Elena, my daughter, would graduate at 9 a.m. As a father, I had promised I would be there early to save her a special place, but the traffic and icy roads were conspiring against me. While driving down I-70, I adjusted the car heater and grabbed my cell phone to text my wife quickly. "Martha, I'm coming. I was just a little late," I typed quickly. Little did I know that that would be the last message I would send before everything changed. In the distance, I saw a large truck coming from the opposite direction. The vehicle appeared to slide, its rear end wobbling dangerously on the icy road. My heart raced. I slowed down, but suddenly I realized that the truck was out of control. He crossed the central divide like a runaway monster. "No, no, no!" I shouted, turning the steering wheel to avoid the collision. But it was too late. The truck hit the side of my car with devastating force. The sound of metal twisting and glass shattering was deafening. Everything turned upside down. For a moment, I felt my body being thrown, my head hitting something hard. Then came silence. When I opened my eyes, I realized something was wrong. I was no longer in the car. He floated above the scene, observing everything as if he were a spectator. My body was trapped between the hardware, my face pale and motionless. Paramedics ran around frantically, trying to cut the metal with tools while shouting commands to each other. I heard someone say, "He doesn't have a pulse," and then, "Prepare the defibrillator." I should have been panicking, but I wasn't. I felt a strange, comforting peace, as if I had been freed from all my pain and worries. I floated higher, as if I was being pulled away. The scene below began to fade, becoming a blur of lights and sounds. Everything went dark, but not in a scary way. It was a welcoming darkness, like the silence of a womb. Then, I felt an absolute lightness, as if my body no longer existed. The transition was smooth, like diving into calm waters. The darkness slowly dissipated, and I was enveloped by a light that was not only visible, but almost palpable. The space around me felt alive, vibrating with energy, as if every particle was filled with purpose and meaning. It wasn't just a place, it was an experience. The environment seemed to be made of liquid pearls, iridescent, in constant movement, reflecting colors that I cannot describe with earthly words. There was a harmony in this space, a perfect balance that made me feel part of something infinitely larger. There was no floor, ceiling, or walls, but at the same time, everything felt complete, as if I were in the heart of the universe. The peace I felt in that moment was overwhelming in its purity. All the worries, fears, and pain that I had carried throughout my life were gone. I was no longer Cassian Merrick, the architect, the father, or the husband. I was just an existence, a consciousness that felt deeply loved. As I moved, or maybe it was the space moving around me, I heard something. It was not a sound in the ordinary sense, but a vibration that penetrated directly into my soul. It was a voice, full of love and tenderness, but also with unquestionable authority. "Cassian," she called. The simple act of hearing my name in that voice made me feel like every piece of who I was had been reconstructed, but in a more complete and true way. I turned around, or at least I intended to, because the movements there didn't follow the physical rules I knew, and that's when I saw him. In the distance, a figure walked towards me, surrounded by a golden light that pulsed like a sunrise. There was no hurry in his steps, just a serenity that seemed to fill the entire space. As he approached, my eyes took in details that immediately challenged every image I had of him. His face was not that of a Caucasian man with straight hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He had warm olive skin with Middle Eastern features, a strong nose, deep brown eyes that reflected golden hues, curly black hair, and a beard that looked natural but well-groomed. He was as human as he was divine. his appearance radiating a light that came not from without but from within. When he stood before me, I knew without a shadow of a doubt who he was. I didn't need an introduction. My heart knew. He stopped just a few feet away from me, and for a moment everything seemed to freeze. There was no sound, no movement, except the pulse of light that emanated from him like a living aura. His eyes, deep and brown with golden reflections, seemed to contain all the knowledge, all the pain and all the love in the world. When our eyes met, I was overcome with a sensation so intense that my legs, or whatever I had there, gave way. I fell to my knees. "Cassian," he said again, his voice filling not just the space around me, but every part of me. It was as if my name, spoken by him, had a sacred weight, as if I was being seen and known completely, without reservation. "Do you recognize me?" he asked, leaning slightly towards me. His voice was so gentle it almost made me cry, but there was something about his posture that carried an unquestionable authority. You are Jesus," I stammered. My mind was in a whirlwind. How could he look so different from every representation I knew and yet so clearly be who he was? He smiled. It wasn't just a smile. It was as if the entire universe was smiling with me. "Yes," he replied simply, "but not in the way you were taught to imagine me." There was a pause. The silence between us seemed loaded with meaning. Finally, he said, "My image has been shaped by human cultures over the centuries. People saw me through the lens of their own stories, their own limitations. But what matters is not how I look, Cassian. What matters is what I came to teach." As he spoke, I saw images flashing around me, like projections on an invisible screen. I saw crusades, colonizations, wars, discrimination, all justified in his name. Each scene was a punch to the soul. At the same time, he took on different appearances. It was a black man, an Asian woman, an indigenous child. Each form radiated the same light and the same essence. "I am of all people," he said. "My love is universal." I felt tears flowing, or at least the sensation of them. "But people fight in your name. They divide. They use you to justify hate," I said, my voice shaking. Jesus bowed his head, his face calm, but with palpable pain in his eyes. "That's not what I taught, Cassian. This is not who I am." He then touched my shoulder, and an indescribable warmth invaded me, as if all the wounds in my soul were healed. The message has always been love, the love that transcends beliefs, races, and human divisions. I was speechless. He had summed it all up in devastating simplicity. Before I could process it, he reached out his hand. "Come on, Cassian. I want to show something." Without hesitation, I took his hand. The touch was both physical and spiritual, so real that it gave me a shock of consciousness. In an instant, everything around me changed. We were no longer in pearly space. In the blink of an eye, the pearly space disappeared. Now, I was in a completely different place. The sun shone brightly over a barren, dusty terrain. The smell of dry earth mixed with the aroma of herbs filled the air, while voices and sounds of a busy market echoed around me. There were donkeys carrying goods, children playing barefoot, and people dressed in simple robes walking in all directions. I immediately recognized where we were, ancient Jerusalem. I was standing in the middle of a narrow street, watching everything with eyes that were no longer mine. It was as if he was seeing the world through a sacred lens, capturing the essence of every detail. The colors seemed more vivid, the sounds clearer, and each face that passed by me seemed to radiate stories and entire lives. Jesus was next to me, with his human appearance, wearing simple clothes, but with a presence that made everything around him seem insignificant. He looked at me and said, "This is the world that saw me as a man." As he spoke, a scene unfolded before us. There he was, the historical Jesus, walking through the streets of Jerusalem. He looked exactly like the man next to me, olive skin, curly black hair, and a beard. He was about 1.65 meter tall, small compared to people today, but he exuded an immense presence. There was nothing extraordinary about his physical appearance, but it was impossible not to be attracted to him. I saw people approaching him, some begging for healing, others just seeking comfort. Jesus stopped for each of them, touching them with a gentleness that was both human and divine. He smiled at a child holding a dove and helped an elderly man up from a stone bench. He was an ordinary man in everything except his unconditional love. "I was not a king in the eyes of men," he said, I was a simple carpenter, a son of a humble land, but the love I brought knew no bounds. Then the scene changed. I saw crowds following him, their faces full of hope and despair. I also saw looks of hatred and rejection, men murmuring among themselves, pointing at him. Not everyone accepted my message. Jesus continued, his voice tinged with sadness, and many have distorted what I taught. Suddenly the view changed again. Now I saw the darkest moment. Jesus carrying a cross, the crushing weight of his mission reflected in every step. I couldn't bear to look, but he grabbed my shoulder. "Fear not, Cassian. This was necessary. True love requires sacrifice." He showed me the past as it really was, without the layers of glamour or dogma we know. He was not the golden Christ of cathedrals. He was an ordinary man with an extraordinary mission, living in a time full of injustice and hardship. But even in that simplicity, he carried the purest love the world has ever known. Before I could speak, he looked at me again, his eyes shining with an intensity that seemed to pierce my soul. "Understand, Cassian, my message was never about power or control. It was about love and unity, about the connection between all beings." The street began to disappear, and again I was pulled back into the pearly space, but this time, carrying in my heart the weight and depth of what I had seen. Back in the pearly space, I remained silent, trying to process everything I had just witnessed. Jesus remained by my side, his presence as comforting as it was overwhelming. My heart seemed to expand and contract at the same time, as if trying to take in the vastness of everything he represented. But he didn't give me much time to reflect. "Cassian," he said softly, but his voice rumbled like thunder inside me. "You need to see more." With a wave of his hand, the space around us began to transform again. Images began to appear, floating like visions projected into the air, but so vivid they seemed real. First I saw crusades, soldiers in armor marching with crosses on their banners, swords drawn, and eyes full of fervor. The violence was brutal, and each blow felt like a direct betrayal of the love I knew Jesus represented. "In my name, wars have been fought," he said, his voice thick with pain. But that wasn't my message. It never was. The visions continued. I saw scenes of slavery, with chained men and women being dragged away while their oppressors justified their actions by citing scripture. I saw hate speech, acts of discrimination and exclusion. I saw people being rejected and persecuted because of their color, culture, orientation, or beliefs. Each scene was like an open wound, and I felt the weight of each one. My image was shaped to justify divisions, he continued. People took my name, my essence, and created borders. But the love I brought to the world knows no boundaries. He doesn't discriminate. He is for everyone. As he spoke, something extraordinary happened. His appearance began to change before my eyes. First, he became a black man, his skin glowing with a rich, warm hue, his eyes as deep as the originals. Then he took the form of an Asian woman, with long, silky hair and a smile as full of grace as any other. Then he was an indigenous child, small and delicate, but with a look of wisdom beyond his years. "I am of all people," he said. "I am from every culture, every race, every heart that seeks true love." Visions began to swirl around me, each one showing how its image had been used and distorted throughout history. I saw European depictions of a towering white Jesus, followed by local versions in other cultures, each shaped through the lens of humanity. "I did not come to be worshipped as a figure," he explained. "I came to show the way, to teach that love transcends appearance, culture, or religion." My tears flowed freely as I absorbed the depth of his message. "So why did we let this happen? Why do we distort what you taught so much?" I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. He looked at me with a tenderness that almost dismantled me. "Because human beings are imperfect, but that doesn't mean they're beyond the reach of love. You can still course correct to Cassian. You can still show people the truth." I felt a fire ignite inside me, not of anger or guilt, but of purpose. He was right. What I saw didn't need to be the end. We could, as humanity, choose to love again, choose to break down the barriers we create for each other. Before I could speak again, the space began to shift once again, preparing me for what came next. When the pearly space began to stabilize again, I felt that something had changed within me. The visions of suffering and division were still fresh in my mind, but at the same time, there was a new clarity, a new strength. I looked at Jesus, who stood before me, now in his original appearance, radiating a light that seemed to have a life of its own. "Cassian," he began, his voice as gentle as it was firm, "what you saw was not meant to crush you with guilt or sadness. It was to show you that humanity can still change, that there is still hope." My hands were shaking, or at least that's how I felt, even though I wasn't sure I was in a physical body. "But how, Lord? How can I change something so big? I'm just a man. No one will listen to me. Many won't even believe me." He came closer, touching my shoulder with a hand that seemed to contain the weight and lightness of the universe at the same time. The warmth of his touch invaded my being, dispelling my doubts momentarily. "You don't need to change the whole world, Cassian. Just start with those around you. True love does not require grand gestures or crowds. It grows from heart to heart, like a flame that spreads in silence." He paused, looking directly into my eyes. "But to do that, you need to first understand the love I'm showing you." At this moment, the surrounding space changed once again. Now I saw images of my own life. It was like watching an intimate film, but with an almost painful clarity. I saw times when I judged others by their appearance, by their choices, by their beliefs. I saw times when I remained silent in the face of injustice, thinking it wasn't my problem. And I saw times when my pride stopped me from asking for forgiveness or offering help. My chest tightened. "I've failed so many times," I murmured, the words coming out almost like a groan. "And you are still loved," Jesus responded immediately, his voice full of compassion. "Cassian, God's love is not conditioned on what you do. He simply is. But now you have the chance to grow, to share that love with others." I felt a heaviness dissolve inside me, replaced by a determination that didn't seem to come from me, but from him. "And what do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice firmer this time. He smiled, a smile that seemed to contain the very essence of joy. "Tell me what you saw. Speak of the love that transcends differences, of the truth that unites us all. Don't worry about who believes or doesn't believe. Just plant the seeds." He leaned in closer, and his eyes, deep and bright, held mine. "You are not alone in this mission. I am with you always." His words echoed in my being, so deep that they seemed engraved in the very fiber of my soul. Before I could respond, I felt the space around us begin to dissipate. The pearly light became dimmer, and a new sensation began to take over me. Heaviness. My body. It was coming back. Suddenly, the pearly light began to dissolve, and the feeling of weightlessness that had enveloped me was replaced by something I hadn't felt in a while. Heaviness. It was as if he was being pulled back into a tight, confined space. The welcoming warmth of Jesus' presence still radiated within me, but now it seemed distant, almost like an echo. My eyes slowly opened, blinking against the bright fluorescent light from the ceiling of a white room. My mind was confused, as if I had been ripped from a deep dream and transported to a reality that felt both familiar and strange at the same time. I heard voices around me, human voices. "He's awake! My God, he's awake!" someone exclaimed. It was a woman. For a moment, I couldn't recognize who it was. Only later did I realize it was my wife, Martha. His voice shook with emotion, a mixture of disbelief and relief. "Mr. Merrick, can you hear me?" Another voice sounded, professional and urgent. A doctor, apparently, leaning over me, observing my vitals with clinical precision. His eyes, however, were wide, as if he also couldn't believe what he was seeing. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore. Only a hoarse sound came out at first. "What happened?" The doctor, who I later learned was Dr. Julian Tanner, responded calmly, but his expression betrayed how shaken he was. "You were in a serious accident, Mr. Merrick." His heart stopped for 7 minutes and 23 seconds. "I don't know how it's possible, but you're here and all your vitals are normal." Normal. The word seemed to echo ironically. Nothing was normal. Nothing would ever be. I looked around, taking in the scene. There were machines beeping beside me, tubes connected to my arm, and Martha was holding my hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You're dead, Cassian," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They said you wouldn't come back, but here you are." I knew what had happened. He knew what he had seen, what he had heard, but in that moment, the magnitude of it all seemed too big to put into words. How could I explain to Martha, to Dr. Tanner, for anyone, that I had been in a space beyond space, that I had seen Jesus, and that he was so different, so more real than I had ever imagined. Martha squeezed my hand again, pulling me back to the present. "Are you well? It's okay now," she said over and over, as if trying to convince herself as much as me, but I knew nothing was okay, not in the sense she meant. I had a mission now, a purpose that weighed on me in ways I didn't yet fully understand. I needed to share what I had learned. But how? As I lay there, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of the hospital, I felt something inside me. It was not fear, nor doubt, but a calm certainty. Whatever came next, I wouldn't be alone. The days after my return to life were a mix of confusion, relief, and a profound sense of transformation. Physically, it was as if nothing had happened. The doctors, still perplexed, carried out a series of tests, seeking explanations for my miraculous recovery. No brain damage, no significant injuries other than some superficial bruises and cuts. "You are a medical anomaly," Dr. Tanner said in an almost skeptical tone. But apparently a very lucky one. Although my family was relieved, they were also disconcerted. Martha was the most vocal. "Cassian, you were dead, and now you're here, talking as if nothing had happened. How do you explain this?" His question hung in the air, but I didn't know how to respond. Not yet. I spent hours in the hospital bed, reliving every moment of the experience, the peace of the pearly space, the deep eyes of Jesus, his words, "I am of all people," and the mission he had placed in my hands. Everything seemed so clear there, but back on Earth, things seemed more complicated. I couldn't ignore the impact it had left on me. Before the accident, my life was dominated by deadlines, commitments, and the constant desire for control. I was a methodical architect, a perfectionist, always planning every detail. Now sitting in that hospital room, surrounded by machines and the worry of my family, I realized how insignificant it all seemed compared to what I had experienced. I started to notice the people around me in a completely different way. The nurse who changed my bandages, the cleaning lady who silently cleaned the corners of the room, even the doctor who seemed suspicious of anything outside the scientific realm. They all carried a divine spark, a fragment of the love I had felt so intensely. Before, these people would just be part of the scenery. Now, they were extraordinary in their humanity. On the third day, Martha pressured me again. "You're not telling me something," she said, holding my hand firmly. His eyes were fixed on mine, demanding a truth I was still afraid to share. "You saw something, didn't you?" I took a deep breath, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Yes," I admitted, my voice sounding quieter than I intended. "I saw Jesus." The silence that followed was heavy. Martha looked at me like she was trying to decipher if I was serious or if this was a side effect of the trauma. "Did you see him? What was he like?" "Not as we imagined," I replied, looking at my hands as if I could find the words there. "He was not the Jesus of the pictures you see in churches. He was real, human, and he had a message I need to share." Martha didn't respond immediately. His expression changed from incredulity to something that seemed closer to acceptance. She knew I wasn't the kind of man who would come up with something like that. "Then tell," she said simply. "Tell everyone." Those words stayed with me. It was as if she was echoing what Jesus had already asked of me, but I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Talking about something so deeply spiritual in such a skeptical world would be challenging. Still, I felt like I had no choice. That was my mission, and I needed to find a way to fulfill it. When I was finally released from the hospital, a new reality began to unfold. Returning home should have been a moment of comfort, but instead it brought an avalanche of thoughts and doubts. How could I explain to people what I had experienced? How do I convince someone to believe that Jesus gave me a mission to break down prejudices and share universal love? The first big hurdle came during a conversation with my doctor, Dr. Tanner, on the day of discharge. He had spent the last few days closely observing my recovery, and his professional curiosity was evident. "Mr. Merrick," he began as he signed the release papers, "you have had an extraordinary experience. I'm a man of science, but what do you think happened?" I took a deep breath, knowing this was an opportunity, but also a potential trap. "I saw something that changed everything for me," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I was in a place of absolute peace, and I found Jesus." Dr. Tanner's gaze changed instantly. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his expression skeptical. "Jesus," he repeated, as if testing the word. You had a religious experience. This is common in situations of extreme trauma. The brain. It wasn't my brain. I interrupted, my voice firmer than I expected. I know what I saw. He showed me things that cannot be explained by science. It wasn't a hallucination. He shook his head, half smiling. I'm not here to question your faith, Mr. Merrick, but I also can't validate this scientifically. The important thing is that you are alive and healthy. The rest, well, that's up to you. That was the first of many frustrating conversations. Whenever I tried to explain my experience, I was met with skepticism, doubtful looks, or subtle comments that made me seem like a man seeking attention. Even some close friends expressed discomfort. Maybe you're misinterpreting, one of them suggested over dinner. After a trauma like yours, the mind can play tricks. Despite this, I couldn't deny what I had felt. Jesus' message was engraved on me like a sacred scar. My love is universal. These words echoed in my mind every day, challenging me to see the world in a completely new way. It was during a moment of prayer, a few weeks after the accident, that I began to notice the true transformation within me. Before, my prayers were mechanical, full of memorized words. Now, they were different. When I closed my eyes that night, I didn't visualize the white, serene Jesus in the paintings that adorned the churches of my childhood. Instead, I felt his presence like a living force, filling my heart with indescribable warmth. I realized that my faith was no longer about dogma or rituals. It was about love, about looking at each person, regardless of their appearance and beliefs or choices, and seeing in them the reflection of the divine. It gave me a new vision of purpose, but it also made it impossible to ignore the barriers I needed to face. My attempts to share my experience were still met with resistance, but I slowly realized that I didn't need to convince everyone at once. As Jesus had told me, love grows from heart to heart, like a silent flame. I just needed to get started. The months following my return were a constant test of faith and purpose. Each day was a new opportunity to share what I had experienced, but also a reminder of the challenges I would face in doing so. Whenever I encountered resistance or skepticism, I heard Jesus' words again. Plant the seeds. Don't worry about who you believe or don't believe in. One of the first times I realized the impact of my story was in a conversation with my daughter, Elena. She had been silent about the accident since my discharge, apparently hesitant to bring up the subject. One night a year, while I was reviewing some documents in my home office, she came in and sat in the chair next to me. "Father," she began, her voice low, almost hesitant. "What happened to you that day? What did you see?" I closed the folder in front of me, turning to face her. His eyes were fixed on mine, a mix of curiosity and vulnerability. I took a deep breath, knowing I needed to be honest, even if the words were hard to find. "Elena, I saw Jesus, not in the way we imagined, but in a way that changed everything for me." She frowned, clearly intrigued. "Jesus, like this. Did you talk to him?" I nodded. "Yes. He showed me things about the world, about us as humanity, and he gave me a mission. He said I must share what I learned, that the love he brought has no limits. It does not depend on race, culture, or religion. It's for everyone." Elena was silent for a moment, her eyes searching my face. "You believe this is real, don't you?" she asked finally. "Not only do I believe it," I replied, my voice firm. "I know it is. He showed me a truth that goes beyond anything I've ever experienced." She nodded slowly, taking in my words. "You know, Dad, I always admired how practical and rational you were. I guess if it turned you like this, there must be something true to it." His acceptance was a milestone for me, proof that the seeds Jesus had mentioned could truly blossom, even if they started small and silent. Since then, I started sharing my story more openly. It wasn't about convincing people of a doctrine or dogma, but about helping them see beyond the barriers we create for each other. I spoke to groups of friends, attended church meetings, and even wrote anonymous articles, sharing my experience in a way that would reach anyone willing to listen. What changed most about me, however, was how I started to see the world around me. Every face I saw on the streets of Denver, every casual conversation I had, seemed charged with greater meaning. I saw the divine presence in the little things, in the laughter of a child, in the effort of a worker, in the look of someone in search of hope. Today, my faith is not something I keep to myself or practice only in moments of silence. It is in every interaction, every choice. Jesus did not come to be worshipped as a distant figure, but to show that God's love is in everyone and everything. It doesn't matter what we call it. It doesn't matter how we imagine it. What matters is living this love. I end this report with a request. Look at the world around you with new eyes. See beyond appearances, divisions, differences. There is a light in each of us, and when we connect with it, we connect with the divine. That's what Jesus showed me, and that's what I hope you find too. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.